Thank you for joining us for the teachings of the mysteries of sex, both physical and spiritual, as taught from the Elite's Sacred Book of Knowledge, the Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars. Friends, we're going to get right into part 2 of the mysteries of sex and learn its nature and functions. In a previous chapter, we have described in a very brief manner the actual differentiation of the human ego as a deific atom of life. We need not therefore repeat any of the description there given, but we will add that it must be a self-evident fact that each ego contains within itself all the primary elements of sex in a latent condition. These attributes have not as yet been subjected to the requisite conditions for their evolution. In this state, then, there is neither love nor wisdom manifested within the ego. It cannot know happiness when it is ignorant of sorrow. It cannot form any conception of rest before weariness has approached. There can be no real love for the ego when it has never experienced the various contrary conditions by which love is distinguished. The wisdom of the ego in this state is equally latent, since it possesses no means of arriving at a true knowledge of its various surroundings. In this state we behold the spiritual atom in its primal condition, wherein the power of God hath just created it. It is the first spiritual atom. The various series of states through which this divine ego must penetrate in order to evolve its soul sphere are the necessary means by which the eternal potentialities of sex must be awakened. When this transpires, the divine ego becomes pregnant with the dual forms of its own organic life, and the twin souls are born, the male and female elements of its being, which are represented in Genesis as Adam and Eve, knowing neither good nor evil. A beautiful description, this, of the embryonic human souls. These twin souls are the absolute expression of the masculine and feminine rays of which every absolute atomic ego is composed. The masculine ray contains a portion of the feminine elements, or there could be no reaction of its forces. The feminine ray must likewise contain a portion of the masculine qualities for the same reason. These twin souls contain a portion of each other. They constitute the sun and moon, so to say, of the ego's creation. And when once they become differentiated, they are as eternal and immortal as the ego which called them into existence. They can be neither absorbed nor annihilated by time nor eternity. They constitute the divine idea of their deific parent, and as such, they become the divine expression of love and wisdom upon this earth. Note, this statement requires some slight qualification. We mean that no foreign or outside influence can absorb or annihilate the sexual qualities of the soul. It is therefore true that the masculine and feminine attributes of the soul cannot be destroyed as a whole, but the masculine portion may attract its feminine portion or soul mate, and by the intense selfhood of its own dominant forces, virtually destroy her manifested existence. This absorption, however, is a very rare occurrence and only transpires in the case of those magical adepts of the astral plane who have attained their psychological powers by complete polarization of all the truly human elements of their internal natures. Such magical adepts become the concentrated centers of spiritual selfishness, but teach the external masses that self is the very demon they have conquered. These occult processes has transformed them into sexless beings who are neither human nor divine, and yet they profess to be the guardians of the secret doctrine of the sacred science. In this latter capacity, they have formulated much erroneous philosophy, since they are self-magnetized and self-deluded by their own positive idea of nature, to such an extent that they cannot penetrate beyond their own astral spheres, nor receive any knowledge which elevates the soul to higher views and truer conceptions of God's infinite resources. It is from this magical school of thought that mankind have received the doctrines which teach that sex is only the appearance of matter and not a spiritual reality, whereas nothing in this mighty universe is so manifest and so eternal as the male and female expression of the divine soul. These adepts profess to have blended the two, but they have simply polarized the feminine and created a conscious selfhood of the other. It is impossible for the absolute ego, the twin soul, to descend into more outward conditions than the paradisical state. So in order to attain the full development of its internal attributes, its own soul, expressed as the male and female elements, each unit is projected outward upon the subjective arc of the great cycle, where, after passing through innumerable spheres and states of life, each finally reaches the polarizing point of creation in the mineral, which is the turning point in its cycle of necessity. From this point, its journey backward again is traversed upon the objective arc until it reaches the climax of material forms. We see, therefore, that the nature of sex is to give perfect expression to the two grand attributes of deific life, love and wisdom, that to attain this end, the divine soul of the absolute ego becomes differentiated as male and female, each conscious of its own, each a perfect expression of the positive and negative forces of its being. When once this differentiation is completed, then they exist as the divine idea of the microcosm and constitute its universe, even as the myriad creations of space constitute the divine idea of the deity. This being so, each portion of the dual soul contains forever the perfect symbol of its internal qualities, and always gives expression, in its outward form, to the symbol of its internal nature. Like produces like. The function of the soul is to awaken and round out those qualities and attributes which are latent within. And as we have seen that there are two sets of soul qualities, one the necessary outcome of the other, we see the harmony and the philosophy of the twin forms of life to express them. Both male and female, as we have endeavored to show, possess the necessary positive qualities for the perfect subjugation of material forces. Hence, it is that when the twin souls are projected on their journey into matter, they travel upon divergent lines along the subjective arcs of the soul's evolution. These lines, if it were possible to measure them, would form two sides of an equilateral triangle with mineral as a base, while the apex would indicate the absolute ego or point of projection. The return journey between the mineral and man forms a similar triangle in reverse, which will indicate the objective arcs of the soul's evolution. When both arcs are combined, they represent the mystical seal of King Solomon, the double trinity, or six-pointed star. This completes two acts in the grand drama of life. The closing tableau in the first act represents the stationary forces of the crystallized mineral, and the second act, the external conditions of human life. The third and last act in the human cycle briefly reviews the whole of the previous two arcs and evolves another six-pointed star, which represents the higher and lower planes of manifestation. This last act is the transit of the soul through the seven supermundane spheres of disembodied existence from man to angel. But in its grand outlines, it is also a spiritual trine whose closing tableau represents the reunion of the twin souls, symbolized by St. John as the celestial marriage of the Lamb. Thus, we begin with the one divine monad or ego, and in the course of its expression and of the gradual evolution of its sexual attributes, we see it slowly transform into a trinity. This trinity, in the sub-cycles of its evolution, forms three triangles, which constitute the symbol of its forces three times expressed upon the three sub-cycles of its journey. These three sub-cycles are the subjective arc, or the cycle of unconsciousness, the objective arc, or cycle of intelligence, and the ethereal arc, or cycle of soul consciousness. The results so far of our present research show that the origin of sex begins with God, that the nature of sex is the manifestation of his biune spirit, and its functions are the spiral motion of its evolutionary forces that awaken and round out its latent possibilities. It now becomes our duty to consider the third section of our subject, the relation of the sexes to each other. That is the end of part 2, friends. We thank you again for joining us. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. Please hit the like button and share the video. Stay with us for part 3, the relation of the sexes to each other. Until then, our best regards.